Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jonestown. Jonestown.
Oh, no.
It's a
Defense,
name.
big one.
It's a name that I think has sort of echoed through history
Right.
as this
It's almost like really don't.
shorthand for
Yeah, like a cautionary tale.
cult disaster. Yeah.
But the People's Temple Agricultural Project in Guyana, which culminated in this just horrific event on November 18th, 1978, with the deaths of over 900 people.
Yeah, it's and it's stuck with people ever since.
It's one of those things where you sort of hear whispers of it throughout your life and, images and things like that.
Yeah, and you don't really know the full story.
To really get into it, I think we need to look at all of our sources.
Okay.
We have the Wikipedia entry on Jonestown.
Good foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the account from the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training.
Right, which includes
Richard Dwyer's account.
Richard Dwyer.
He was there.
Yeah, first-hand perspective.
As a U.S. diplomat.
Yeah.
So that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, really interesting to hear.
To contrast that with the other narratives.
And then we have an incredibly detailed story in People magazine.
Oh, wow.
And
interesting.
And then, this is really interesting.
Okay.
We have the guide to the massive FBI file compiled on Jonestown.
Wow.
So there's just tons of information.
Okay, so we've got a lot to get through. But let's try and break this down.
Yeah, like what is our mission here?
I think the mission should be to really get a good understanding of the timeline of events.
Yeah.
And the motivations of the people involved.
Right. And I think it's...
without getting too bogged down.
Yeah, it's really easy, I think, with a story like this.
Right.
To...
sensationalize it.
Yeah, and it's sensational.
Right.
So it's easy to sort of get caught up in that aspect of it.
Right.
But I think it's important to kind of take a step back and really understand...
the nuances.
Yeah, like what actually happened.
Yeah, what led up to it.
Yeah. And I think there is some
we really want to understand who was Jim Jones.
Right.
How did he gain so much power and influence?
How did this happen?
And how did so many people end up following him to their deaths?
Yeah. So let's start
at the beginning.
With the People's Temple itself.
Okay.
Founded by Jim Jones.
In 1955.
In 1955 in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Interesting place to start.
Yeah.
For something like this.
Yeah, you weren't exactly a hotbed of...
Yeah, not what you'd expect.
Yeah, cults or anything like that.
Right. But it started as a religious movement.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like it had some pretty unconventional ideas.
Right, yeah, he called it apostolic socialism.
That's interesting. So was he saying, like, traditional religion was a barrier?
Yeah, I think it was almost like traditional religion was hindering people from kind of reaching a higher
level of consciousness or something.
Yeah, towards socialism.
Right. So he saw socialism as the true path.
Yeah, almost like this next step in enlightenment.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is pretty radical.
Yeah, for the time. I mean, that's combining two very different ideologies.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he himself was also very politically motivated.
Right. He was very open about his admiration for, like, Stalin, Mao Zedong, Lenin.
Yeah, so these were not just, like, passing interests for him.
He was very serious about these beliefs.
And he was very concerned at the time about the persecution of the Communist Party.
Right. So this was during...
in the U.S.
the Red Scare and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, McCarthyism.
McCarthyism, yeah.
So there was a lot of fear and suspicion around anything, even remotely communist.
So these were all very real influences on his worldview.
Yeah, and they clearly shaped his whole philosophy and how he structured the temple.
Yeah, and you can see it in how things played out later on.
Absolutely.
With this
communal living.
Yeah.
The emphasis on obedience.
Yeah, and the loyalty to a single leader.
Right.
It's very much
authoritarian.
Yeah, mirrors those
structure.
Yeah, figures. The temple itself.
Yes.
Early on, they had some pretty progressive views, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, especially around racial integration.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this actually led to criticism.
Oh, wow.
For them in Indiana.
So progressive for the time, but not...
Yeah, it was a very...
for the place.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Segregated society.
Right.
And so in 1965, Jones decides to uproot the entire operation and move to Redwood Valley, California.
That's a big move.
Huge undertaking.
Yeah, uprooting everyone and moving across the country.
Yeah, the entire community.
That must have taken some serious commitment.
And I think it's a...
right, and I think it should...
a real turning point.
A real turning point.
Of the temple.
Yeah.
Because in California, they really started to establish themselves in bigger cities.
In a more,
like Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And San
But
Francisco.
an urban environment.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really where their political influence starts to grow.
So they found fertile ground
Yeah.
in California.
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco in particular.
Okay.
They became a real political force. They were very effective at mobilizing their members.
Organized.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And they were actually instrumental in George Moscone's mayoral victory in 1975.
Oh, wow.
And as kind of a reward for that support,
Okay.
Jones was appointed chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority.
That's a huge
That's a big deal.
position.
Yeah, it gives you
Not a lot of power.
so much control over housing policy.
So he's using this religious movement to gain
political power.
real political power.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And, it really shows how he was...
He was smart.
Yeah, he was incredibly adept at building alliances and leveraging
his followers.
Yeah, his followers to gain political power. And this also gave him access to even higher-ranking political figures.
Oh, wow. Like who?
Like Walter Mondale.
The vice presidential candidate?
Yeah. Wow. And Rosalind Carter.
The first lady.
The first lady, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There are pictures of them with Jones.
And they were endorsing him.
Endorsing him, yeah.
So he
supporting him.
Legitimacy.
Yeah, so he had this
in the eyes of
veneer of legitimacy by the public.
Yeah, and influence. Which is pretty startling to look back on.
Yeah, knowing what we know about what happened.
Knowing what happened.
Yeah.
But it's...
So at this time,
he
had this public image of being
progressive.
A progressive leader.
Yeah, community-oriented, doing good.
But behind the scenes.
Things
were different.
Things were much darker.
Yeah. And that's where the establishment of Jonestown comes in.
Yeah, and this wasn't just like a whim.
Right.
Like a sudden decision.
It seems like it was planned in advance.
There's a contingency plan in place.
As early as 1970.
As early as 1973.
Wow.
Why? What triggered that?
It looks like it was a combination of things.
Okay.
There was some critical press coverage starting to come out.
So he was
feeling the pressure.
Yeah, he was definitely feeling the heat. And there were a few defections.
People were leaving.
Yeah, people were starting to leave the temple.
Okay.
And speaking out against Jones.
And so they had this idea to relocate to a Caribbean missionary post.
Okay, a missionary post.
Yeah. Interesting. That was the initial idea.
So it's kind of like a cover story.
Yeah, almost.
In a way, to escape the scrutiny.
The scrutiny and the potential legal issues.
Right.
And they ended up choosing Guyana.
Guyana?
Yeah, what was it about Guyana?
Why Guyana? Well, it seems like they were looking for a place that was kind of off the radar.
Yeah.
And Guyana was a relatively poor country at the time.
Yeah.
And they also had these extradition treaties.
Yeah, so they were
like the US.
Looking for a place where it would be very difficult.
Right, to extradite.
To bring them back.
Anyone back to the U.S.
To the U.S.
Yeah.
If there were any legal issues.
Yeah.
If there were any problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in October 1973, their board of directors passed a resolution to
formally establish this mission.
This agricultural mission in Guyana.
Okay, so it was all very official.
Yeah, official. And initially, about 500 members.
Wow. That's a lot of people to set
to construct this place in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. Building a settlement from scratch.
Yeah, and Jones presented this as an idyllic socialist paradise.
Okay, so he was appealing to people's
their idealism
and their
a sanctuary
desire for a better world
from media scrutiny, from the U.S. government.
So it was a refuge from
a safe haven.
The evils of capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
From the West.
Yeah, so it had this sort of...
It's a powerful...
dual purpose, it seems.
Narrative.
Yeah.
And he managed to secure an agreement with the Guyanese government.
Wow.
For mass migration.
Okay, how does she do that?
Well, he presented temple members as skilled and progressive individuals with significant financial assets.
Oh.
So he was...
So it seems like he was...
promising.
Yeah, misleading them a bit.
Investment.
Yeah, about the resources they actually had.
Right.
because I think the Guyanese government,
Yeah, a poor country.
looking for
Right.
any kind of economic boost they could get.
And the sheer number of people,
Right.
I think, just overwhelmed their immigration procedures.
Yeah, they probably weren't equipped to deal with something like that.
And this also made it much easier for Jones to control who entered
and who left.
And left the settlement.
So he was isolating them.
Yeah, isolating them from the outside world. So what was daily life actually like?
Yeah, what was it actually like?
In Jonestown.
Before the tragedy.
To live there.
Yeah. We know there was a major influx of people.
In the summer of 77.
In the summer of 77, yeah.
Why was that?
Well, that's when Jones himself and several hundred key members moved permanently.
Oh, so that's when Jones himself moved.
Yeah, he was still kind of going back and forth before that.
Gotcha.
And this was really triggered by these increasingly intense media investigations.
So the pressure was getting
in San Francisco
to be too much in the U.S.
So it was almost like an escape.
An exodus to avoid the authorities.
And the media.
Yeah. And this was a big shift.
For the people who were already there.
Yeah, for the people who were already there.
Yeah.
Because the atmosphere really changed.
In what way?
Well, even like the simple forms of entertainment they had were quickly replaced with constant exposure to Soviet propaganda films.
Oh, wow.
So
that's a big shift.
Huge shifts, It's like from having a little fun to really hardcore
indoctrination.
Yeah, indoctrination.
Yeah.
The focus really shifted
towards
away from this idea of building a self-sufficient community, and towards this ideological
purity, ideological purity, and
loyalty to Jones,
obedience to Jones.
And the bureaucratic demands of Jonestown also increased.
So it became more
significantly
bureaucratic, even though they were supposed to be this.
It's ironic,
like free socialist paradise.
Yeah, because it put a lot of strain on their labor and their agricultural efforts.
Yeah, so their basic needs weren't being met as well.
Things started to fall apart.
Right.
And the buildings started to deteriorate.
Yeah.
And the work schedule was initially 6 days a week.
Wow, that's intense.
Long hours in the tropical heat.
Yeah.
They did ease up a bit later on.
Okay.
But it still sounds incredibly regimented.
Regimented and controlled.
Personal freedom.
Right. Very little autonomy.
And even their evenings were dedicated to these mandatory classes on socialism.
Oh, so they had to go to...
And these lectures by Jones.
Wow.
Which would just be him.
Like propaganda.
Yeah, rambling on about his perceived enemies.
So it was really about reinforcing his ideology.
It was like brainwashing.
Yeah, it was like constant indoctrination.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, on top of all that, he was also using these really sophisticated mind control techniques. Well, our sources mentioned that he was inspired by Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung.
Oh, wow. So he was studying totalitarian leaders for inspiration.
So it was like constant exposure to these very carefully crafted
narratives. Yeah.
And also the active suppression
of any
outside information or dissenting voices.
So he was controlling the information flow.
And then the only news they were allowed was heavily filtered.
Right. Like from where?
From sources like Radio Moscow and Radio Havana.
Oh, wow.
Consistently siding with the Soviet Union.
Right.
Yeah. And demonizing the United States.
Right.
So it really created...
Yeah, like an us versus them mentality.
Yeah, the enemy is out there.
Right.
We're the only ones who are safe.
Yeah.
And he was so controlling
of it,
of the information that their main connection to the outside world was this shortwave radio.
Okay. But even that was controlled.
Was under constant scrutiny by the temple leadership.
Right.
In fact, they were cited by the FCC.
Oh, really?
For technical violations.
Related to
their radio transmissions.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was very careful.
Right. He wanted to make sure that they weren't getting any.
That they were only getting the information.
Outside information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That he wanted them to have.
That he approved of.
Yeah.
Right.
And even the children.
Right. The children.
Their upbringing was largely communal.
With Jones as the...
Yeah, Jones was the...
central figure.
Father figure.
Yeah, for everybody. Wow.
And a detail that I think is easy to overlook.
Right.
Is that this whole operation was largely funded by...
By what?
by the Social Security checks.
Oh, wow.
Of the members.
So they were
sending them back to the temple.
Social Security checks.
Yeah.
To the temple. That's a
huge
source of income.
Source of income for them.
Yeah.
And the U.S. Embassy did interview some of these people.
The recipients.
Yeah.
The checks.
But no one claimed to be held against their will.
Right. I mean,
at the time,
it's understandable. If you're living in fear, you're not going to speak out against your leader.
And it's also important to note
the
demographics of Jonestown.
Okay. What was the makeup?
It was overwhelmingly
of a community
African American.
Oh, wow.
And a large portion of that were Black women.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was appealing to
a specific demographic.
Appealing to people who had experienced systemic racism.
And marginalization in the U.S.
The promise of equality.
Right.
Was the age draw.
Very powerful. So
moving on.
Yeah, let's move on to
the events leading up to Congressman Ryan's visit.
Okay, so this is where things start to really unravel.
It seems like Jones's paranoia was really spiraling out of control.
Okay.
He was increasingly fearful of
what?
External threats.
Like what kind of threats?
Like a government raid.
Oh, so he was convinced they were just
conceal outguard food and shoot them down.
Right.
Yeah, and he was also
using a lot of
he was very heavily reliant on drugs at this point.
Okay, so that's a recipe for
it's a bad combination.
Disaster.
Yeah. And he was constantly addressing the community
about these
threats.
Yeah,
and he was weaving these elaborate
conspiracy theories. Yeah.
Involving the CIA and other
big classic.
Yeah, shadowy figures.
Conspiracy theory. And he even reportedly studied the manipulative tactics of people like Hitler and Father Divine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he was looking to other authoritarian figures for guidance.
And Father Divine apparently gave him this advice.
Which was?
To find an enemy.
Find an enemy.
As a way to unify his followers.
Create a common enemy to rally against.
Yeah. So it was all very
progressive.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, to create this us versus them mentality.
Right. So the outside world was the enemy.
Yeah.
And he was the protector.
Yeah. And only he could save them.
Right.
And then there were these terrifying white knights.
White knights? What were those?
These are these reported emergency drills.
Okay.
Where everyone would be gathered.
In the pavilion?
In the pavilion, yeah.
Okay.
Often surrounded by armed guards.
Oh, wow.
And they'd be presented with these
horrifying scenarios.
Scenarios like what?
Like a government invasion.
Okay.
And that the only honorable option was revolutionary suicide.
Oh, wow.
So he was basically
preparing them.
Rehearsing for mass death.
For this eventuality.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the 6-day siege was another one of these.
Okay, what was that?
This was a prolonged drill where they were armed and preparing.
To defend?
Yeah, to defend against these perceived mercenaries.
Oh, wow.
So again.
So it was like a.
Reinforcing this.
Siege mentality.
That they were under attack.
Right.
And it's really disturbing to learn that they had been receiving regular shipments of cyanide.
Cyanide?
To Jonestown.
Why?
Since 1976.
Not 76.
With this explanation that
2 years before.
For cleaning gold.
Cleaning gold.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right.
It makes no sense.
No.
And there's even a record of a temple doctor asking for permission to test cyanide on pigs.
On pigs?
Yeah, in 1978.
So he was experimenting with poison.
So it's a very clear indication.
Wow, that's
premeditation.
Chilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was this whole
Stone custody dispute.
Custody dispute, right?